Good morning and welcome to FirstService Residential's annual Florida legislative update. My name is Tony Calici. I'm special counsel to FirstService Residential, and I'm happy to be your moderator for this morning's session. We have with us as well, moderating is my friend and long-term legislative partner, Travis Moore of Moore Relations. Travis, good morning. Welcome.
Good morning, Tony. It's much better to be out of Tallahassee and with all of you this morning, so thank you.
Well, the Florida legislative session was supposed to end on May 2nd. It's actually been extended because the one thing the legislature has to do every year, they didn't do. They have to adopt a budget. So the session continues for them to get that done. They didn't have to pass community association legislation, but that seems to be something that no matter what, the legislature is going to tinker with the community association laws in the state of Florida, which gives certainly the attorneys that we have in our panel some job security, because they're always something to try to decipher when the legislature is in session. We're going to be taking a deep dive into the condo legislation that was adopted. We'll also talk about some other bills that impact community associations, and we'll also look at some of the bills that didn't pass, because usually that's a sign of something we have to look for next year. We will be recording today's webinar. It will be available on the FirstService Residential website very soon. If you have any questions as we move through the webinar this morning, use the Q&A option on your control panel to submit those questions. We'll try to get to as many of those as we can during the presentation. If not after the presentation is over, we'll try to address those questions. We add the caveat every year that the advice that we provide, the information that we provide in this webinar, is not meant to be specific legal advice. Your association attorney needs to guide you on the impact of the law on your community. And a lot of times it's going to be dependent upon what's in your documents. And it doesn't mean that because something is adopted in the law that it automatically is going to apply. There's an analysis that has to be done. So you're going to need to lean on your association attorney for advice on implementing the changes that have taken place in the law. I'd like to introduce our panel. We've got a great panel here this morning, and they will help guide us through this process. We start with Laura Manning, a member of the Siegfried Rivera firm. Laura, good morning.
Good morning, Tony. Thanks for having me. Good to see everybody.
Thanks for being with us. Marnie Dale Reagan. Marnie is a partner in the Haber Law Firm. Marnie, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks so much. It's great to see this much turnout and a lot of things going on.
For sure. And last but not least, Bryony Swift. Bryony's a shareholder in the Becker Law Firm. Bryony, good morning.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Tony.
Travis, let's get into it. You want to start us off with a quick overview on any HOA issues? Are we talking specifically, when we talk about the big bill that was passed, strictly condo co-op, anything HOA related?
No. The legislature kind of took a pause because, as you recall, last year during the 2024 session, some pretty significant HOA legislation did pass, dealing with board member education, dealing with any, parking, storage, all kinds of issues there. So they said, and it was really probably the most significant HOA reform package kind of coming out of some of the stories we'd heard from South Florida with the hammocks and some other situations there. So they passed that and then said, let's see how that takes effect, given the fact that, over the last 3 and 4 years now, they've had to tinker so much with the condo stuff. They were like, let's not jump in and do a whole bunch of stuff with HOA until we figure out how that's going to play out. So really on the HOA front, there was things that certainly have impacted managers that manage associations that are under 720, the HOA statute. But as far as the actual tinkering with 720 itself, they did not do that. There was a number of real dangerous things that were out there, which we may get into as we have time today, that they wanted to kind of keep from happening. So they kept those vehicles from moving. And then I would just mention from a process standpoint, as you said at the outset, the legislature is still technically in session. So they just kind of went into a recess so they can get this budget done, which they have to get done by June 30th. So all the other substantive bills they kind of laid on the table, they're not going to move except for things that impacted the budget. But the interesting thing that creates is that if a bill now goes to the governor during this time period, instead of having 15 days to act on it, if they are in session, he only has 7, he or she, the governor only has 7 days. So that's what would happen if these bills that we're talking about today go to the governor while the legislature is still technically in session.
Okay. Travis, I guess we'll start with the big beautiful bill, the House Bill 913.
The big beautiful bill. Sure. Again, I'm going to background, and then we'll kick this off to our panelists. I think we all have been living since the Surfside collapse with this real focus on not only building safety and inspections, but reserves and how associations handle their maintenance issues in the reserves. And there were certainly differences between the House and the Senate throughout this process. And I think we could all we could all agree that what ended up passing was a pretty aggressive and demanded that you're not going to just be kicking that can down the road, as that proverbial saying goes. So they made it a pretty strong, you're going to do these reserve studies by the end of last year, December 31st. And then as you get into that 2026 budget that you're putting together, you're going to be required to do some things. So I believe what we were able to successfully deal with this year is to provide some flexibility, certainly some uniformity, just terminology, that kind of thing, to make this easier to comprehend, understand, and implement. Tony, I'm going to kick it to you so you can kind of work our way through the panelists on who best to handle the various portions of this very large 165-page bill that, as of today, has not yet gone to the governor, but the governor has indicated now in a couple different press conferences, even one early this morning, that he will be signing it when it's given to him.
Okay, well, I guess I can start off with the discussion concerning Chapter 468, which regulates managers and management companies. There were changes enacted previously in the law which dealt with conflicts of interest, and most of that legislation stemmed from abuses, as is normally the case. There were situations in South Dade where a condominium board was contracting with a company that the president's brother ran, unbeknownst to other directors or other members of the community. And as a result, we had laws passed previously which dealt with conflicts of interest. And the key thing in the law, and it continues to be the key thing, and it was actually clarified in this year's changes to the law, it's all about disclosure. The relationship has to be disclosed. If the relationship is disclosed and the board makes the decision, it's not a manager who hires a related company. It's a board's decision after the disclosure has been made. That's what the law focuses on. And that as I said, that continues to be the case in the tweaks that were done this year. So a little clarity added to the definition of what is a conflict of interest. Again, the key is the fact that if it's disclosed in the contract, then that avoids a lot of the issues related to the conflict. Let's see what some of the other things that were important here, and we'll discuss these more later on as well. If there is a conflict of interest that wasn't disclosed, and ultimately the association becomes aware of it, the law now clarifies that the association has the ability to terminate that contract that created the conflict. And that termination becomes effective when the association gives notice to the CAM or the CAM firm. Couple of other things that are important here. If a manager's license is revoked, the law now clarifies that that revocation eliminates the ability of that manager to practice in the field for a period of 10 years. So that's a pretty severe penalty. And, you know, it's the professional responsibility of a CAM to make sure their license is kept up to date. And now there are very real ramifications if they don't do that. Each CAM has to create an account to be maintained by the Division of Land Sales and Condominiums, the Department of Professional Regulation, that indicates which properties that person is an on-site manager for. Key is that it's an on-site manager, but that has to be maintained as part of the records that the department has, so that it's easy for anybody to identify, you know, where that manager is working. That information has to be updated if a manager changes locations and now is managing a different association. That information has to be updated within 30 days after any change. And as far as a community association management firm, a management company must identify on its online licensure account the community association managers that it employs. Let's see, a community association manager may not knowingly perform any act directed by the community association if such act violates any state or federal law. So again, the word knowingly is important. Managers aren't going to be practicing law, but if the manager is aware, the association attorney has advised, no, you can't do that. You can't reject this prospective purchaser. That would be a violation of law. The manager can't take action that the association may direct if the manager is aware that that would constitute a violation of law. Certain disclosure requirements have to be included in our management contracts in certain fonts, and the manager has to abide by all professional standards and record keeping requirements. Again, it doesn't change the way we as a management company practice, but it's now been codified as part of the statute. And let's see, the board now clearly has a responsibility to make sure that the manager they're hiring or the community association management firm they're hiring is properly licensed. That's been codified now in the statute. So that's something that obviously board members are going to have to ask for when they're contracting with a management firm or a community association manager. And those, I think, are the high points. Let me just see if there was anything else in the manager reform. No, those are pretty much the high points of the changes in the Chapter 468. Okay.
And there were Tony, just real quick, there were a couple little tweaks regarding, you know, managers have to attend at least one board meeting in person annually and stuff like that I think will end up helping provide, you know, that better that relationship between an association, a board, and their manager. So tweaks like that were made as well.
Okay.
Otherwise, you covered certainly the conflict stuff.
All right, let's move on now. Laura, there were some changes in the definition of habitable in terms of milestone inspections and service requirements. You want to take us through those changes?
Yeah, sure. So like Travis said, there was a lot of clarifications in this big, beautiful bill this year. And one of the clarifications that I think, is going to really help some of the lower or mid-rise buildings is that they have included the word habitable to the definition of the buildings that are required for the mandatory milestone inspections and the structural integrity reserve. So if you recall previously, the language was just 3 stories or higher, and there was some confusion for those, lower villa type or shorter villa type buildings about whether it applied to them if one level was a garage and then there may have been 2 stories on top of it. So the statute was clarified to include the word habitable stories. So now milestone inspections and SIRS are required for condominium buildings that have 3 habitable stories. I don't know if you wanted me to cover the other issues in the other parts of 553.899 that were revised. Just there was a couple of other items in 553 for milestone inspections and section 553 that were revised. And basically any professionals that are now bidding on inspections or repairs must disclose to the association if they also are intending to bid on the work. So that's also now a requirement that associations should be aware of when they're negotiating for a milestone inspection or a SIRS report. Yeah, so that was some of the important requirements and changes that were done to section 553.899.
Okay, and we'll get into some
Right.
a little deeper dive later on in terms of the deadlines, revised deadlines, and we can tackle that in a little bit. Travis?
Yep. I'm sorry, typing away on these answers. Let me go back to this. Let's see. I think we're on the transparency and access
Yep.
issues, and there were some new rules regarding official records, regarding recordings now of which is what I've been answering on these transparent meetings, video conference meetings, how they're conducted. So Marnie, could you walk us through some of that? I think that's based on the questions we're getting, it seems like that's a hot topic.
Absolutely. And what we'll do is starting by going to the definitions portion of the statute. They added a definition for video conferencing. And what they've done is they've created parameters by which the association is going to have to operate. It's going to be addressed to not only board meetings, but annual meetings. We'll talk about annual meetings in a couple minutes when we talk more about 112 and some of the operational issues. But what they're looking to do is if you're going to have a video conference, you have to have both video and audio enabled. Your notice that you provide and post on the property and or mail if it's a membership meeting is going to have a hyperlink, but it's also going to have a phone number where owners can call in to listen. You're going to have that audio capability, but here's the key. You're going to have a physical location to hold the meeting. Manager probably there with the phone, the Zoom link, the computer opened up. And then here's the kicker. You have to record any video conference meeting that you have. It becomes an official record for at least 1 year. That video recording has to be held. And then thereafter, the minutes are going to be held and kept and maintained in the official books. So real quick, some of the questions that I saw, I kind of agree with. We started to see a trend post-COVID. Everybody was doing Zoom. It was convenient. We started opening it up, not just membership meetings, but board meetings, allowing far more owners to participate by Zoom. The question of mute always gets brought up. It's kind of a fun kicker. But the reality is we've got the parameters now, and we used to kind of be able to default and say, you know what, statute hasn't caught up, but now it has. So we have these parameters. We have to abide by them. It may cause some associations to maybe want to hold less Zoom meetings, which is going to then kind of default back to you're going to have your board there, the quorum present, the telephonic option is still available. But in order to avoid that video recording, a lot of times, a lot of associations, a lot of attorneys will instruct their managers, if you're going to video, if you're going to audio record a meeting, let's keep it, make the minutes, and then get rid of it. So this is going to be something that's going to be a 180 departure from that. If you're having that audio capability, you have to keep it. Shifting just a touch, but related in that official records component, is first of all, everybody's got our websites. Statute was changed recently to drop you down to 25 units having to have that website. By the end of this year, our January 1, that's going to continue. But here's the new obligation that all of you are going to have is that your records have to be uploaded within 30 days of that action in order to be compliant. There's competing interest right now, I think, within the statute on board flexibility versus owner transparency, and neither one is better or more powerful than the other. However, it's going to create a lot more impetus on managers to make sure that they are being compliant. There's a couple little nuance changes. Typically, you used to have a copy of your declaration of bylaws or a photocopy. Now you have to have a real copy. So it may be a matter of going to your county recording site if you don't have that, but making sure that you don't just have an old photocopy of it. It's not going to work anymore. Your minutes have to be kept, as well as you're obviously part of your official records, but there's now discussion of electronic records having to be maintained as well. Your minutes are 12 months. Again, we're talking about these meetings that if you have that video recording, that gets lodged right into there. With respect to your financial records, they've added bank statements and any bank ledgers. That has to be included as well. The one gift I think we got with respect to records this year is last year there was some very onerous language talking about if you don't provide the records twice in 1 year, the board members can be removed from the board. That repeatedly has been removed. So that's kind of a small gift we have. And it's now we're looking at willful and knowing. So we're looking at more intentional acts about trying to retain or oppress records. So just be mindful of that. When you have your owners and prospective purchasers coming out to management and saying, we want these records for our purchasers, not only is it going to be the deck bylaws rules, you're also going to have to give them your annual financial audit, your financial statements, as well as your annual budget. So make sure you've got that ready to go, timely. I know Brian is going to talk a little bit more about your financials coming up, but just be very careful with this website that you get it up within 30 days. You've got your minutes, all those video recordings, and then there's another catch-all. If you go through the statute, various meetings require an affidavit of mailing to be included with it. Those affidavits now have to be kept as part of your official records. They also have to be on that website. Council can certainly guide you as to when you're going to need to have that affidavit, but I would tell you, if all else fails, prepare an affidavit. You've got it. It's always better to be over-prepared than under-prepared. So those are some of the changes just relating to our official records. And then now, I guess, on to reporting.
Yeah, there definitely were some expanded reporting requirements that affect condos and co-ops across the state. Bryony, you want to kind of lead us through what was done?
Absolutely. So with your financial reporting, here's an update that's going to make your accountant very happy. The deadline for your financial reporting has been extended from 120 days to 180 days. That means that your financial reports will not be due during tax season, and that will make your accountants very happy. A financial report can now be delivered to your members electronically via the internet. Marnie mentioned a few minutes ago, affidavits. An affidavit of compliance is required to memorialize the delivery of a financial report. And that affidavit has to be executed by an officer or a director of the association. The statute is specific and it doesn't say manager there. And now a majority of all voting interests in the condominium must approve if you're going to produce a lesser level of financial reporting. Another important financial development is the investment of association funds. This is now in 718-111-16. It says that a board shall use its best efforts to make prudent investment decisions that carefully consider risk and return to maximize returns. So those are your instructions if your association wants to invest association funds. Carefully consider the risk and maximize returns. An association may invest reserve funds, but there are limits to that. Reserve funds can be invested in a combination of CDs or deposit accounts, and that's without a vote of the unit owners. I turn it back over to Travis.
Thank you, Bryony. Okay, so we are going to talk about some bylaw and operational changes. The bill made several adjustments to affect how boards govern and manage operational decisions that you're all making. Marnie, can you outline the key changes that boards need to be made aware of in that regard?
Sure. I mean, initially, once again, we're back to the video conferencing. That seems to be the trend here. It's going to be a matter of making sure that your notices are posted. The committee meetings, if they're going to be held by video or Zoom, or they're going to have the same requirements here. Just like your committee meetings would have to have minutes if they're making final decisions, same here. And what I would tell you also is review your governing documents. Sometimes you have further requirements in your documents. So while the statute is getting more and more controlling, just be mindful. I will say that the law firms in South Florida that are writing documents are following all of these trends and are certainly requiring them. We do have the division is going to have to make some rules for us. That'll be interesting to see if they can get them done for us timely. Let's hope. But again, we're talking these video conferences. You have to have the notice, the hyperlink, the phone number, physical location. What's difficult or interesting that I'm candidly not quite sure how it's going to work out is the annual meetings can be done by video conferencing as well. There is one change to annual meetings. There is language. It used to be within 45 miles of the association. Now it says within 15. There is still the caveat of the county, but holding remote meetings in New York City is not going to work anymore. There's language that owners can vote electronically. The kicker here, which to me is going to be very problematic, is your annual meeting is typically your election of directors. There is language stating that a quorum of the board of directors must be physically present. To me, that's interesting in that, are we talking about your outgoing board? Because sometimes your outgoing board isn't even running in the next election, but they're going to have to show up for the election. And to that end, what happens if they don't? The statute silent on that. I don't think that it might be a kind of a wait and see, but we'll get there when we get there. Once again, your annual meeting, membership meeting, if it's going to be held by video, recorded, those all become part of the minutes. It's all your official records. That recording is going to have to be maintained for that full year. And we'll see kind of how it plays out. Something else that I've seen is there used to be some language in the statute about broadcast notice, and it had certain criteria of how you could do that. That has been deleted out, probably in lieu of all of the electronic measures that associations are already taking.
Okay, budgets, Laura. Obviously, some changes made in the law with regard to how budgets are presented and approved.
Yep. And just carrying forward what Marnie just mentioned, there are so many of the changes that the legislature put into this bill are going to require the division to revise the Florida Administrative Code and all those rules, because there's a lot in here, and there's just, we don't have any consequences. We don't have the nuts and bolts of how a lot of this stuff has to happen. But regarding budget meetings, 718.1122E, addresses budgets. First of all, again, they can be held by a video conference. That is, like any other, I guess, like any other board meeting or annual meeting now, those can be held by video conference. But one of the changes that they made, if you recall, I know in recent years we were getting a lot of pushback from owners because our budgets were over that 115% from the prior year. And previously, when a budget, from one year to the next was over 115%, the statute required that unit owners who wanted to challenge it had to challenge. This year, the change that has been made is the legislature has removed the part about the unit owner challenge and the unit owners having to present a substitute budget, and is now requiring that the board simultaneously propose a substitute budget that doesn't include any discretionary expenditures. So for clarification, remember, when you're calculating whether a budget from one year to the next is more than 115% over last year's budget, we don't include required reserves, and we don't include insurance premiums. And those are typically the very big numbers for an association that will cause a budget to, expand. So taking out the required reserves and the insurance premium, if your budget is still 115% over what it was last year, the board is required to submit simultaneously a budget without those discretionary expenditures. I guess, the difference, as an example, do we have to replace the carpet this year, right? We've included the cost to replace the carpet. Is it discretionary? Do we have to do it, or is it something we can do without? So submit the budget The substitute budget has to be proposed at the budget meeting before the adoption of the annual budget. It goes out 14 days ahead of the budget meeting with the I guess the desired budget. So there's the desired budget and the substitute budget. And then, you know, there's this is where I think we're going to need some clarity from the division. At the meeting, the statute says unit owners must consider and may adopt a substitute budget at the meeting. So if there's a substitute budget proposed, I believe that that is now requiring boards to give unit owners the option to actually vote at that meeting. So your lawyers are going to be dealing with that, you know, that issue coming up, because unit owners must consider and may adopt that substitute budget. So they're going to be given a choice and be able to vote. And a substitute budget is adopted if it's approved by a majority of all voting interests, unless the bylaws require adoption by a greater percentage. So if you're presenting two budgets at the meeting, you've got to give the members the option to vote on the substitute budget. And if a majority of the owners approves the substitute budget, then I guess the board is not going to be able to get that discretionary carpet in their budget. And I think that, you know, so that's just some of the, yeah, those are, you know, some of the new issues with budgeting. I covered the required reserves, what isn't included, and whether it's 115%. And I get the one change in that section with regard to what's included or what you don't include. Used to be the reasonable reserves is what you did not include. Now it's the required reserves. So required reserves are not included in that 115%. So, and that covers budgets. So.
Okay, Travis, now the related
Okay.
topic of reserve funding and what was done with respect to that.
Yes. Okay. And now I think we're getting, I mean, I thought this was going to be more the meat, but everybody's very much interested in all these, the meeting requirements, and video conferencing and quorums and all kinds of fun stuff. So, let's get into, as I mentioned at the outset, when these bills were originally passed, and we're going back to Senate Bill, you know, 4D, and then Senate Bill 154, and then last year's 1721, et cetera. And, you know, we ended up having, you know, Condo 3.0 and all of those things. The main concern was, oh my God, you're requiring us to do all of these reserves right away. We haven't been reserving. When we now do inspections, our remaining useful life of our items is only like 3 years. So we don't have 15 years to catch up on reserves. We have to do it within 3, and on this whole bucket of things. And it became this craziness, because that's what happens when you delay doing what should be done. Just ask a dentist. But anyway, yeah, nothing good ever comes from waiting. Just put that out there, folks. So now let's dive into reserve funding. This bill does allow for more flexibility in how and when these reserves are funded. Marnie, what are the most important updates that boards should understand about reserve contributions?
Sure, absolutely. And because there are so many questions that I'm seeing with respect to the video conferencing, when I kind of finish this, I'm going to address some of those because they're good questions. And I don't want to say that we don't know the answers, but this is brand new law. And so how it's going to be implemented is going to be very interesting. But 2 reserves. First and foremost, the easy reserve definition used to be anything over $10,000 to maintain, repair, replace. Well, inflation has arrived with the legislation, and so now that has been increased to $25,000, as well as the division is going to have to provide us with an inflation-adjusted amount. That's going to happen periodically, and we'll see how that goes. The absolute gimme for funding reserves relates to if there's a termination. If the membership's actually going to vote to terminate the condo, they can then turn around and vote to waive the maintenance of reserves pursuant to their SERS requirements, the Structural Integrity Reserve Study. But everyone else is locked into their reserves. So the big debate this past year of the legislative session was, how are we going to try to provide some relief to the members who admittedly hadn't been funding reserves for the last 5, 10, 15, 20, 75 years. And that's where we saw, the very long budget meetings this past year, the special assessments and so forth and so on. So the statute was amended this year, and the relief that they provided was that these reserves, and I'm speaking mostly to the SERS reserves, can be funded by either a special assessment, the association can secure a line of credit, or they can obtain a loan to fund these capital expenses that are required by either the milestone inspection or the structural integrity reserve study. Now, mind you, this line or this loan, if you do that route as opposed to the special assessment, is going to have to be, and I'm going to read it, sufficient to fund the cumulative amount of any previously waived or unfunded portions of the reserve funding amount required by this paragraph and the SERS study. So this is probably a larger number that you're going to be attempting to get a loan or a line of credit out of. And what I would caution associations with is there are limitations to this. One, you can take this route, but you've got to get a majority vote. So it's a full majority of your membership. It's not a majority of a quorum. So it is still a hurdle that's going to have to be overcome, but it is there. It's there as an option. That loan or line of credit, once you undergo this process, you've got to do it earlier than later, because those funds have to be immediately available with no further action by the association or vote of the membership in order to actually get a hold of that money. So it's something that you can think about it, but you're going to have to pre-plan it, move sooner than later. What I can see is all the lenders they're all just rubbing their little raccoon hands together right now, because I have a hard time believing that they're going to lay all this money out and tie it up without some type of fee. There's going to be a quarterly maintenance fee and a semi-annual or an annual maintenance fee to hold and restrain this type of money that these associations are going to look for. However, that annual fee is going to be far less than what it is to actually have it as part of your assessments. But remember, you can have a line of credit, you can borrow. All that money still has to be paid back. So you're going to have to be able to meet the criteria for the lender in order to obtain the loan. Definitely go to counsel, have them review all of those loan documents, make sure that they're going to be as convenient or as conducive to the association as you can. However, lenders are lenders, and I think lenders are going to have the bargaining power. So if you're going to take the loan, the line of credit, or a special assessment as the choice, once you have that membership vote to go for funding your reserves, it's going to have to include it in your annual financial statements. So your CPA loves the 180 days over the 120, but we've got to make sure that this is accounted for, because once that election is made to take that route, we're going to have to be very mindful and keeping on top of that with our record keeping as to prospective unit owners. They get those audited financials as well, and have everything in order. Now, the one association or one group of associations that this is not going to apply to, that this is not going to be a choice for, is a developer-controlled association or an association that's within 1 year of turnover. So it's probably a good thing, because it's going to require that developer to actually have a more accurate budget for operating, so that the purchasers will know what they're getting into. Similarly, if you have a bulk assignee or a bulk buyer, that same restriction is going to apply. Budget's going to have to be the traditional budget with all of your SERS and your non-SERS reserves accounted for. They've also stated that there was a lot of questions in the past. There wasn't a lot of clarity as to pooling. You can have a reserve account that's pooled for two of the more components. All of your SERS would be pooled. All of your non-SERS can be pooled. You can go from pooled to straight line, and that's going to be a membership vote is not necessary. It's going to be actually just a vote of the board. So I would still obviously notice it properly. Whenever in doubt, whenever it deals with money, I always say throw in the affidavit for record keeping, but the board's going to have that ability to do that. But there is the magical pause that's been put into place, but it's a very, very exact situation. So for these associations that have gotten older, if you adopt a budget before December 31st, 2028, if you've done your milestone inspection within the previous 2 calendar years, you can have a majority of your membership vote to pause or to reduce your reserve funding for a period of 2 annual budgets thereafter. So it's going to be a very precise group of associations that this is going to apply to, but it is a sense of relief that can be attributable if you've had to I don't want to say pre-fund, but if you've had to catch up on your funding for your SERS or your milestone to make these repairs to get back into compliance, you can actually take this, you can hit that pause button. Now, if you do hit the pause button, you're going to have to get a brand new structural integrity reserve study before you can start funding your reserves again. So that cost is less, but it is a cost that's there, and it is available if an association finds themselves in that position. And once again, the division's going to have to get engaged with inflation and trying to provide a little bit of guidance.
Marty, I just wanted to mention it because that was a big deal and big part of this negotiations between the House and the Senate and the governor on this. Because there were a lot of these older buildings, the ones that were at least 30 years of age. And if you were in Miami-Dade or Broward, you had to go through recertification, but the rest of the state certainly didn't. And so they went out, they were required then to go out and do these milestone inspections. And they then, and the whole point of the Senate's position has always been with these milestone inspections is we have to figure out, because of our 67 counties, we have 65 counties, a lot of condos. We have no idea the health of them, where they are as they have aged. So it was just very important that we get this kind of this baseline. Where are we? Have these buildings inspected. When they were inspected, they were told, oh, by the way, in a lot of cases, because you haven't been maintaining them as you probably should, you now have these, significant expenses and significant repairs that have to be done. And then at the same time, you now are also having to do, you're now also doing this SERS, which is saying you're now having to start reserving. And so before you've even done these repairs, when they look at your components and they say, well, your roof, your concrete, this only has a remaining useful life of 1-2 years. So there was another huge expense being, shown on paper that you're going to have to really speed up, this speed up and hurry up and catch up kind of thing. So they were getting hit twice. I kind of look at it as, I pay my taxes quarterly. So if I don't pay enough on April 14th, I have to not only pay the balance of what was owed for 2024, but I also have to pay my first quarterly payment for 2025. So it's like this big double hit. So the legislature said, wait a minute, if you're going to be doing repairs, then you can put a pause, because you then are going to go back and do a SERS. And now when you do your SERS, they're going to be looking at components that have been repaired, that are all fixed, that are all brand new. So now when they look at your roof, instead of it needing to be done in 2 years, you're good for 15 years. So now, your annual hit per unit is going to be a lot less, because you now have time on your side to fix it. So I think it's going to be a big deal, especially, and their focus really was on the older buildings, where people were saying, I'm having to do all these repairs, and yes, it could be argued you should have been doing them through the life of the building, but they weren't. And oh, by the way, you also have to start reserving, and your numbers are big because you haven't done the repairs. So that's what this whole pause thing was about.
Well, and if I can just comment, remember too, that pause has to be approved by a majority
Correct.
of the voting interest. So, I mean, we do know that when it comes to money, right, and financial, a lot of times associations, some of them as large as they are, they will get those votes. But it's, that's just, it's
right. And they were trying to, mirror the ability. So right now for non-SERS items, you by majority vote, it used to be just by a majority of the quorum, blah, blah, blah. But now by majority vote, you can vote to waive or reduce those items. So not often do they try to mirror something but in this case, that's, as we were sitting there, they were like, well, we allow an association by majority vote of the unit owners to waive reserves. And that's how that came to be.
And I think what you'll see is, to Laura's point, there is a lot of traditional associations that didn't have the participation. these big issues come up, they will start to get together. You know, Brian, you're certainly going to speak about electronic voting, and that's going to be a tool that's very, very helpful. Just to address real quick some of these questions regarding the video conferencing and recording. And to be honest with you, A, it's not law yet, and B, we don't know exactly how the division is going to respond to these things. But just some of these questions, you know, board meetings the board members absolutely are entitled to attend by phone. Members aren't necessarily entitled to attend by phone. There's nothing in the law that says that. But once you put that link out there and you've noticed it that way, I think it's going to trigger that requirement. Same thing goes with a committee meeting. Once you have that option, once you posted it that way, you're going to fall under all of these requirements relating to actually having them. Now, if a board member calls in for a board meeting and is just on speakerphone, that one I don't necessarily think is going to trigger the recording requirement and keeping the recording for a year, but you may want to err on the side of caution. And again, I think what this may do is drive a lot more in-person meetings to avoid any ambiguity. And I'll keep scrolling through some of the questions if I see them.
Yeah, real quick, just Marty, if I can ask, because there is a question, and that way I don't have to go through and look through this statute. Do you know? So the question is, what's the exact statute that the video recordings have to be kept for a year? Because we just made it part of the official records that have to be kept for a year. What off the top of your head do you happen to know? 718 point.
It's 111, and then it's also referenced in 112. 111 is
Okay.
the official records, and then towards the end of that is where it talks about the website where it has to be uploaded. So
Okay.
it is going to have to be on the website. It's not just an official record that's available for review.
Okay.
They did make
All
that caveat for at least for the first year, and then you could remove the recording from the website and the official records, and then keep the minutes.
Great.
But I will say that if you've got a situation where you think there's going to be litigation out of it, I'd keep it.
So Travis, one of the earlier versions of the bill had a limitation on the number of video conferencing meetings an individual director could attend in a year. That didn't make it into the final bill, did it?
Thankfully, no.
No, it did not. No,
Okay.
no. But here's the problem: just as people go online, and I think it's something that the legislature has to kind of probably figure out how to address. So there's this like AI function that does a summary of the bill when it's originally filed, and it's pretty good. But what happens is these bills change, and they change a lot. And so as the bill moves through the process, there's a whole bunch of things that come and go and get tweaked and fixed. And that initial summary gets kind of locked in, the one that you first see. And so on a lot of this stuff, you're going to need to continue to talk to, obviously, your counsel, attend webinars such as this, and information that will be given out as it relates to what the actual final changes are, because that was something that was there. Just like the issue of if you haven't done your SIRS, then you can't get citizens insurance. Things like that did not pass.
That's a really.
They did also add to the definition of video conferencing the requirement to record and retain for a year as an official record.
Right. And originally,
718-103.
Yeah, that was a 7-year kind of deal, and we're like, let's do a year because that's a lot of data space.
That's a really good point, though, Travis, about that AI. When you search something up on Google, or whatever, and the initial blurb that comes up gives so much information. I had no idea that it didn't track or keep up with, right?
No, it doesn't.
So, good
yeah,
point.
so just, call me. I'm sorry, what?
We'll
Job security for all of us.
So Laura, we've been talking about the SIRS a little bit. Can you kind of go through the revisions that took place with regard to deadlines?
Yeah, sure. So 718.1122G is the section of the statute that deals with structural integrity reserve studies. As I indicated at the beginning, both milestone and the definition of when the structural integrity reserve study applies was clarified to be 3 habitable stories. So 3 livable stories is for clarification. The SIRS requirements also increase the reserve threshold, like Marnie said, on the general reserves, increase the reserve threshold from 10,000 to 25,000. The language, when SIRS reports previously could be done, may be performed by a qualified person. Basically, now the statute changed to must be performed by a licensed engineer, licensed architect, or person certified as a reserve specialist. So I guess takes the guesswork out of who can actually perform that SIRS report for the association. Again, just like with milestones, any person or design professional or licensed contractor who bids on doing the actual SIRS report has to disclose in writing to the association if they intend to bid on follow-up work that is going to be required by their report. I think everybody can see where that potential conflict could arise. So associations and their managers should be, on the lookout for that. SIRS reports have to include recommended funding schedules based on a baseline plan, ensuring that the reserve cash balance stays above 0 for each year, and any recommended reserves. So we were getting a lot of questions last year over whether we had to have 2 reports, right? Do we have to have a SIRS report and a non-SIRS report? So the statute is now clarified that you can have one report, you can put non-SIRS items in the structural integrity reserve report, but they have to be separately identified as not being a SIRS item. So that was, that was a change. The SIRS report, like we discussed a little earlier, must take into consideration the funding methods that are going to be used to fund the maintenance and reserve funding obligations. So if you're an association that is, you do your SIRS report and then you take out a loan to perform some of the required maintenance or required repairs, your SIRS has to be updated to include that funding method. If you do a special assessment to fund, if your association has approved a special assessment to fund those reserve components, that's also got to be included in the reserve study. Also, I think Marnie mentioned it. If, once the association has completed certain repairs required by the milestone or the SIRS study needs to be updated. So I think one of the themes here is that you constantly need to be updating your SIRS report. Just because you get it done and you don't have to have another one done for 10 years doesn't mean that it doesn't need to be updated. So, and you're going to want it to be updated. You don't want old information floating around, on your website. So you do repairs, you update the report. You adopted, alternative funding, you update the report. One thing they did do, I think we said that we were trying to stop associations from being able to kick the can down the road a little bit, but they have once again allowed associations. So any associations that were existing before July 1 or June 1 of 2022 now have to complete their SIRS by December 31 of 2025. So previously, everyone had to have their SIRS completed. Everyone who was a condominium before July 1 of 2022 had to have SIRS completed by last December 31. So now that deadline has been extended, sorry. And again, just like we were talking about before on that, this temporary pause, there's a temporary pause for funding to allow associations to focus on completing repairs and maintenance. Associations with a majority vote, by a majority vote of the members, can vote to pause funding of the structural integrity reserves for no more than 2 consecutive budget years if they have followed that, completed the milestone inspection. Also important, officers and directors must sign an affidavit acknowledging receipt of a completed structural integrity reserve study. That affidavit needs to stay on file as part of the official records of the association. And the division is going to have to adopt rules, adopt the form for the SERS in coordination with the Florida Building Commission. So again, the division, I guess we're going to be waiting on them to complete, or come up with forms and reporting requirements for structural integrity reserve studies.
So I had seen a statistic about the number of associations that were required to complete the SERS by December 31, 2024 under the previous law. And it was like something like only a half had accomplished that. So this will give a little breathing room to those associations. But, I don't know if it's because of a lack of professionals out there that are, it's just tough to find somebody to get it done, or it's just, ignorance of the requirement or ignoring the requirement by some associations. But
yeah, and I remember last year, there was a caveat that was added to the statute, correct me if I'm wrong, Travis, that as long as the association had contracted to have the SERS completed by the deadline, and they were making that good faith effort, then they were compliant. So, I think it is taking into consideration now this extension of the deadline to December 31 of 25, I guess, taking into consideration,
Well, so it was if you had contracted to do your milestone, and
Okay.
we tried to get that to also be the SERS, and that did not pass last year. So now they're just extending the deadline forward. And again, the enforcement mechanism on a milestone is the local building department, your city or your county. They're the ones that can, force you, fine you, to the point of if your building's not safe, evacuate it, et cetera, et cetera. On the SERS, there is no, that's a DBPR function, so it has to be reported to DBPR. That is more of a market-driven situation where, any lender that's doing a loan or a refinance in that building, or if the association's trying to get a loan, or the association's trying to get insurance, or if a unit owner's trying to get an HO6 policy, et cetera, et cetera. All of that, if a buyer is trying to buy and a realtor asks for it, all of those things will trigger a copy of the SERS. And if that SERS isn't done and a deal falls through because you can't get financing, or a buyer walks away, or you can't get insurance, then those board members are, could be personally liable for violating that fiduciary duty. So that mechanism of enforcement is going to come from you better do it, or else you could be in serious trouble as a board member.
okay, Travis, electronic voting.
Oh, electronic voting. Yes. Electronic voting has also seen many changes. And again, I'm going to, there's this great desire of, after, when these legislators go to these town hall meetings, and, there's a great, this desire for more involvement. And I can't get on the board. I didn't know there was a board, a meeting, an annual vote, blah, blah, blah. So they're trying to encourage, and this goes back, Tony, and you and I remember having meetings back with, Representative Fitzenhagen, not even in the legislature anymore. It was like, I want people to be able to vote sitting on the, on the beach in Brazil, where they may be an owner, and yet, to vote, and et cetera, on their phones. So there were some back and forth as it relates to electronic voting. Bryony, can you walk us through, because there are some new changes that are made for adopting e-voting, and can you bring us up to date as to the changes that were made?
So there are two big developments in electronic voting. The first one allows the members to petition to vote electronically. So if 25% of the voting interests petition the board, then the board has to hold a meeting within 21 days to adopt a resolution to adopt electronic voting. Now, there's a limit on that in that the petition has to be delivered to the board within 180 days from the last scheduled annual meeting. And that's probably to protect your board from receiving a petition immediately before the meeting after your first notice has gone out. So it has to be 180 days from the last scheduled annual meeting for that petition to be served on your board. The other big development is if your association has not adopted electronic voting, then your association is obligated to accept ballots by email. The association is to designate an email address for the receipt of ballots. And there are a list of requirements for a ballot to be served in this way. A unit owner has to designate in their ballot, there has to be a blank for them to put in their unit number, a blank for them to put in their first and last name, which counts as their signature. And then there has to be a disclaimer in the ballot in capitalized letters, the largest font in the email, explaining that the right to privacy of your ballot is something that belongs to the unit owner, and the unit owner can waive that right to privacy by submitting their ballot via email. Now, a challenge with this email balloting scheme is that the unit owner doesn't have to transmit their completed ballot. It's not due until the meeting is called to order. So at the scheduled date and time of the meeting, any ballots that have been emailed to that point are to be counted. I can see some procedural issues. DBPR is going to have to explain this, and I can see a lot of management companies buying remote printers so that they can print these emailed ballots at the meeting while the meeting is ongoing. So procedurally, there's going to be some hurdles, but two big developments in electronic voting: one to get your association to adopt formal electronic voting, and then the other to create this alternate procedure.
Okay. So, Brian, we all hear complaints about the division not being properly funded, being understaffed. So what does this bill do? It adds more responsibility to expands the jurisdiction of the DBPR. You want to walk us through some of the things that were done there?
Absolutely, but I will say that last year they got a significant amount of funding and brought on, or had the opportunity to bring on, about 60 people, I believe. So they did work last year on they also expanded jurisdiction last year, and now they've gone even further this year. But they did give significant funding, and hopefully DBPR is able to fill those jobs. So new responsibilities for DBPR. They already had the jurisdiction to investigate complaints. The new statute clarifies that they have the right to review records when they investigate complaints. They have new authority to investigate the completion of repairs required by a milestone. They can investigate board member education. They can investigate CSRS reporting requirements and fidelity bonding. And all condominium associations by October 1st of 2025 are going to need to create and maintain an online account with DBPR. And there's a similar requirement for CAMs and management companies, but here DBPR is going to require certain electronic format information to be entered into their website at least once per year. And DBPR is going to promulgate rules to effectuate this. Any changes in the information will have to be updated within 30 days of the change. And some of the information that you're going to need to give DBPR is, of course, the name of the association and the physical address of the association, as well as the mailing address and the county in which the association lies, an email address and phone number for contacting the association, the name and title of each board member. And remember, you have to update if there are any changes within 30 days. So if someone resigns, that information is going to have to be relayed to DBPR within 30 days. You need to give your CAM's contact information, a link to the association's website, and then answer certain questions about the number of buildings, the number of stories, the total number of units, the age of building based on the certificate of occupancy, any construction that's been done on the common elements within the previous year. They also want information about your assessments. So all assessment rates, including special assessments, and any clarifications whether there are different levels of special assessment based on unit types. They want information on your reserves. They want the purpose of any special assessments, the name of the financial institutions with which the association maintains accounts, and then a copy of any CERS and any additional documentation requested by DBPR. And if they request additional documentation, that documentation is to be provided within 5 business days. So quick turnaround there. And that's the update on DBPR.
Okay, Travis, a few other updates.
Yes. There's a few regarding the hurricane protection measures that were passed last year. There's a tweak to that. And then also the hotel condo issue, or that mixed use issue. Last session, there was some language that passed. It was kind of characterized as clarifying language that just kind of clarified current law, and that was not what it was. It impacted some cases based on some associations that are mixed use. For instance, ones that are in a hotel where part of the building is run as a hotel, another part as a condo association. So those cases that had already been filed were allowed to continue when we're not stopped. And it also put some additional protections in that 718.407 requiring a documentation to be shared. What was happening is in some cases the hotel lot owner was utilizing the association to pay a lot of things that that they didn't really own, that they may have used to, the lobby, the hotel, pool, some of the amenities, et cetera, but the hotel lot owner was then saying, well, here's your bill, association, you owe us X amount of money for your portion of this, which you don't own, we're never turning over to you. And so now there's just more transparency as it relates to that. So it's again for a specialized group of associations that find themselves in those mixed use. There's more of them are being developed that way, but that will provide a lot more protections for associations, and they'll have a lot more just access to documents and information so that they can make sure that whatever they're paying is in fact the proper amount. Nobody's saying that they shouldn't pay. It's just, what's the accounting and how much do we have to pay? And then as it relates to, there was a provision last year that said you've got to set up, and this is, I'm going to say this very generally, but it basically said, you've got to set up a hurricane protection requirements, either if you don't have one in your documents, then this is how it's going to kind of work per the law. And it said that the one piece that kind of got changed was it said if the association has to go in and do repairs and they have to remove let's say your shutters that you have put up, and then you have left town and they have to remove them to do repairs to common areas of the building, that they could essentially charge you, association member, for that amount. And this says you wouldn't be able to do that. So it keeps it all in more the common area, everybody paying for it. That was the kind of the tweak that was made there. Not a big deal, but that was made there. And I think that would take us, Tony, into the next section, because there were some changes made to a bill that deal with hurricane protections that I think a lot of people are interested in.
Yeah, that was last year's implementation of the My Safe Florida Condo program. And there were
Right.
some tweaks made this year, Marnie.
Yes, absolutely. The My Safe Florida program is, it was new last year. It was very interesting. What it did is it created a series of inspections and then an ability to apply for a grant. There are hurdles. Membership and the board are going to have to approve going through the inspection process, utilize certified individuals, approved individuals, or you could go from the list. And then if you got the grant, you had to use it within a year. Everybody ran, put their applications in for the inspections and then the following grants, and then the law was changed. So I don't want to say that it kind of, put it in its tracks. However, the changes this year have sought to clarify some of the inconsistencies or ambiguities we had last year. To be very clear, this is going to apply to 3 stories and above, and you have to have at least 2 single-family dwellings in it. Very clearly, you have to go through the inspection process before you can apply for the grant. You cannot apply for the grant without having gone through the inspection. To me, that seems kind of obvious. However, it wasn't. You've also got to make sure that in order to move forward with your grant process, your windows have to be deemed a common element as opposed to part of the unit. So that's something that may serve to deter some associations or keep them from being able to apply. But it's something that is going to be required by statute, is your windows have to be a common element. The whole point about the grant program is that you have to be able to have a palatable change. You have to be able to the work has to result in a credit, a discount, or rate differential on your insurance. So any type of water intrusion mitigation or any other type of roofing system that is addressed, it's got to exceed what you've got right now. It can be fasteners, tie downs. It has to exceed what you have now. It can't be used for an ongoing project, but it has to result in a credit or a discount in order to be able to go forward. The state also clarified the numbers with respect to the My Safe Florida program, in that for every $1 the association spends, there can be 2 state dollars from the grant. So it's a very clear number differential of what the association is going to have to invest in the process, as well as what this pot of money will as well. But be mindful that all of your repairs still have to be done within the year, or you have to repay the grant. So it's something you want to be mindful of on your timing. I do still think that this money is going to go very quickly as soon as the bill gets approved. It's as soon as it's signed, it's going to be effective. And so I think there's going to be a lot of associations out there that will run straight to this process if they've already, undergone the inspection and are waiting to apply for the grant. And we'll see what happens with it.
Yeah, Marty, that was good, a good job on that, of course. The program is not reliant on the budget for this year. So as Tony said at the outset, the legislature and the governor are still fighting over the budget for the next fiscal year, which starts July 1. This is money that they just did not appropriate, they appropriated but did not spend from last year's budget. So there is, they didn't increase the amount. I think moving forward, we'd love to see it increased. It still is that $30 million minus about $400,000 that they used to set up the program. So last year, number one, it went into effect July 1. Then, the department could start, it was OIR and DFS could start kind of setting up the program. It's handled under Department of Financial Services. They had to contract with somebody. They had to get something. As Marnie said, there was a My Safe Florida home program had been in effect for years for single family homes, but it was brand new for condos. So it took them a long time. So then they really didn't start it didn't go until the beginning of November, and they quickly realized they were going to kind of be overrun. So they just stopped taking new applications very quickly, like 6 days after they opened the portal for them. So they're going to use the roughly $30 million, 29.6 million for the program. They got rid of a lot of the math that was, this much towards per unit for windows and doors, this much per unit towards a roof, this much per square foot. They made it a blanket up to $175,000 in association. Marnie said again, the biggest hurdle was you could apply for an inspection to kind of see where you were with just a majority vote of the board. The state pays for your inspection, but then once you got that, in order to apply for the grant, it took 100% of the voting interest, which We can't get 100% of the voting interest to agree to today's Wednesday. So that never was going to happen. So they reduced that to a still very high number, but 75%, which is easier. One of the changes that was made at the very end of the session, like the day before session ended, was on some wind mitigation devices for water damage, because water damage is the biggest issue that faces condos, especially high-rise condos. And one of these deals where if you're on the 12th floor and you do everything exactly right, but the person on the 13th floor doesn't, then that water's still going to find its way into you, and then down we go down the building. So for water intrusion mitigation devices, the grants are good for those. They are separate from the ones that would require it to also be part of your wind mitigation credits from your insurance company. So take a look at that as you decide, and then it's a matching grant. The association has to have skin in the game. So it's like for every dollar you're agreeing to spend, then the state would give you up to $2, capped out at $175,000, but which is still a good deal, because it's things that ultimately will save you certainly money, certainly grief, going forward into another storm season, which unfortunately they seem to have gotten more powerful in the last few years. So I think it now will work better than it was supposed. Than it never even really worked. It never got off the ground, and then I think we will be able to show that it needs certainly a lot more than $30 million as we go forward.
So just one question, Marnie, you mentioned that, in order for an association to be eligible for window as a portion of the grant, they have to be common elements. How frequently are you guys seeing that windows are in fact within the definitional boundaries of a common element as opposed to the individual units?
I get to be a lawyer and say it depends. It's all document driven, and a lot of the governing documents now that are being written are including the windows as part of the unit and not common elements. So, there's a part of me when I look at this that I think this is kind of aimed more at, aging buildings, maybe fixed incomes, those types of things, and whether it is or it's not. A lot of those older documents sometimes will have the windows being a common element, but there may be an ability to amend. And if people want to try to go through that process to make them common elements, certainly if you're talking about windows and impact glass and all those good things, uniformity and association control, it's something to consider.
Great. So Travis, maybe we'll touch on a few of the things that didn't pass that were considered, because there's a likelihood
Yes.
that committee weeks starting September, we may see these things reintroduced.
There was a number of HOA bills that were filed. 983 is one in particular that started moving its way for at least a committee stop in the House. I think the pause that I talked about before on HOA bills, I don't think that will continue next session. Again, just as a reminder, in even number years, which next year will be 2026, session starts in January. And so since there's no election this fall, they will start committee meetings in September. And so September, October, November, December will be committee meetings, and they will already start on new bills. So we'll need to be vigilant early. But I do think that there will be some HOA reform bills out there again, dealing with that. One in particular issue that developers were trying to do was an issue dealing with amenity fees, dealing with the club fees for HOAs, which once you start paying them, you are required to pay them. You do not get out of paying them. They are separate than your association dues. You can lose your house over them if you do not pay them. It's a whole issue that I think the legislature now is having to deal with as we see more and more of these very large, a lot of these developments, especially in the HOA world, are becoming like these, cruise ships, which you see these commercials on and you're like, good Lord. I mean, do I need a lazy river on my cruise ship? These associations are becoming more and more amenity driven. And a lot of times the associations, very much like the hotel condo issue, the developer is never giving these elements. They're never part of turnover. And then the association is just paying for these restaurants and this stuff and blah, blah, blah. So there needs to be accountability there. So that is an issue. I know there are some very large developers, very large home builders that were pushing that. It will certainly be back. There's a, insurance will also be a part of it this year. Also, there was a bit of a pause on vacation rentals. I think that'll be back. There was an effort to undo the statute of repose change that we made last year that Brian and her firm were very involved in as it relates to construction defect issues. There was a bill to basically repeal what happened last year. That did not pass. I think that those kinds of things would come back. So, as more and more people are living in common interest ownership, and finding it a lifestyle that they want to have, as they're either moving from location to location within the state or coming in from another state or country. I think these issues will always be continued. And Florida's the kind of the bellwether. We have more community associations than any other state. What we do here finds its way, into Colorado and New Jersey and Georgia and other states. So, they look to us on what we do here. So we'll continue to be involved and vigilant on behalf of FirstService and others.
Super. Well, I thank everybody for the information on the legislation. We've got some time. Maybe we'll go through the Q&A and we'll do a speed round here and see how many of the questions we can knock off in the Q&A. We've got about 70 questions, so I'm going to suggest we just start at the top and anybody chime in if they want to answer a question as we come to it. Certified CE courses. We'll have to address that later on, whether or not this webinar is approved for board CE courses. We'll let you know on that.
One question I saw a few times was the effective date for 9/13. If it's signed, which we anticipated, is July 1st. There are some different parameters of when things may go into effect, like relating to websites and updating those types of things. So that's going to be bill dependent, but July 1st is the operating date that this becomes law.
Okay. Do we have to put on the meeting notice that the meeting is being recorded and will be posted on the website?
I don't think you have to say that it's going to be posted on the website. I always typically, if we have a Zoom meeting and record it, at least make the comment at the start of the meeting. That way everyone knows and they can't say afterwards they didn't know.
If a board member calls into a board meeting on a speakerphone, does that not trigger the recording requirement?
I don't think it does,
No.
because board members have always been able to attend by phone.
Right.
Okay. Let's see. Well, it's an HOA question. Again, nothing in this legislative session changed anything there.
For this question, anything that's going to be noticed as having a video conferencing is going to have a physical location.
Okay.
That was a good clarification too, because boards always thought, there was a lot of clients who thought I don't have to have a physical location if I'm having a Zoom meeting and everybody's invited, right? So that was a good clarification that helped us out, I think, to be able to say that, yeah.
And I think that works as long as you don't have, someone that has technological issues or are aging, that type of thing, that couldn't do or didn't want to do Zoom, because it is still social.
So a couple of questions here on controls on for investing reserves, and are T-bills allowed for reserve investments?
The law specifies that you can invest reserves in CDs or deposit accounts. It doesn't go any further than that.
Okay. And I throw this out to the attorneys. What about limitations in documents? A lot of the older documents that limited investment of association funds to banks, savings and loans. How do these changes that are implemented in the law, will they automatically apply? Do we have to go through a Kaufman analysis to figure out whether they apply?
I mean, don't we always have to go through a Kaufman analysis? That's half the fun.
Right.
I think what concerns me the most about this is you get a competing interest of the associations that never used to collect reserves. The owners wanted to have the money in their pockets, invest it their own way, and then write a check. And now you have this mandate that the association is going to have to collect these funds. And so there will be pressure from owners that want that money to accrue and work for them. But that's difficult because the association is a not-for-profit. It's not really supposed to be an investment agency. And the boards are going to have to be really careful to make sure they're compliant with this.
Well, and there's an issue of needing to have that money accessible when you have a repair to do. If that money is invested in the market and it's been a down month, you may not have the funds if you're invested in the stock market. And I think that's the reason behind limiting how reserves specifically can be invested. So other funds can be invested in other ways, but reserves can only be in deposit accounts or in CDs, so that you have the money when you need it.
And Travis, there was much broader language in the bill as it moved through session on investing funds that didn't make it into the final bill.
Yeah, there was, and that may be a good point, Tony, because that may be one of those issues that comes back. It was in the Senate bill, was not in the House bill, and then as they negotiated the differences, negotiated that out. Right now, there's nothing in, or there wasn't in I guess currently until July 1, there was nothing in the laws that relates to investment of, and there was this whole thing regarding commingling. And so it said for investment purposes only, but there's nothing in the Florida Administrative Code, the rules that prohibit it. So what the Senate legislation was trying to do was to say, if you're going to do it, you're not required to do it, but if you are going to invest, here are the guardrails that you have to follow. You have to have a separate committee. You have to have a separate investment advisor. You have to have this, that, and the other thing. But that came out, did not pass. And so, as Brian, mentioned, this is what ended up passing as it relates to that.
Okay. Question here about records retention and how, as to the portion of the statute that requires official records to be maintained, some of which for 7 years. How do you calculate the 7-year period?
From the date of the document.
Okay, right. That
Right.
would seem to make sense. Okay. What
I
about,
wish that this had been addressed, the posting of contracts. There's been a lot of confusion about that because you've got this obligation to post a copy of the contract that's going to be approved at a condominium meeting. And obviously you're not going to paper your elevator with a 50-page agreement. So I think a lot of associations have either said available in the management office or provided maybe a QR code that led them to the website as a way to try to address that.
okay. Board meeting notices, how are they posted electronically for owners off-site?
There's not a requirement for that. It's still posting on property. A lot of associations have just started emailing it out as a courtesy. If you have electronic notice, but again, it depends on, the courtesies are not the law. So there is no requirement to email out board meeting notices.
Okay, and here's a question about get back to investment of reserve funds in terms of what voting is requirement and what options the board has to invest. Does it now require shareholder approval if the board wanted to invest in investment grade security? I don't.
There's nothing in the statute that requires shareholder approval on the investments. It really was as limited as Brian was discussing.
Okay. What happens if there's no quorum at the budget meeting?
So remember at the budget meeting, so first of all, I assume that the question is asking if there's no quorum of members at a budget meeting. So remember, the board adopts
Right.
the budget, and the membership only is going to get the opportunity to vote if the budget exceeds 115% of the prior year's budget, not including required reserves or the insurance premium. So, you know, if that's a good question, if there's no quorum, if the budget is going to exceed the 115% and there's no quorum at the membership portion of the meeting to vote on the substitute budget, then the original budget, I think the board can approve the original budget, not the substitute budget.
Okay. And again, related to the budget, is discretionary defined as a non-recurring annual expense, a one-time expense? I mean, there really is no definition in the statute, is there?
No, and I think the example I used was like replacing the carpet. You know, if it wasn't, if you didn't have reserves for it, you know, it's not required. I think the opposite of discretionary is required, right? So.
Right, and that's what they were trying to get to, because they've gone to so many of these meetings where they're getting these things I'm not passing blame, but like I was in some of them where the board was told, here's our shot. We've been wanting to do all these repairs, which are improvements, which, you know, might be good, whatever. But here, you know, and so the budget's going to go up because now we're required to increase reserves. So we're increasing it for things that are now going to allow us to redo the carpeting in the lobby or whatever. So this is then trying to address that by saying, no, if it's going to be a big increase, then, and you look at what's required in those G items for reserves, and if this isn't a required thing, there's no requirement that we replace the carpet this year, then that then triggers that a membership vote.
Okay, and I think we commented a couple of times during the presentation, everything that was added this year that mentioned the vote of the members to do something, mentioning a majority of the members, if I'm not mistaken, each of the requirements are a majority of the total voting membership, as opposed to a majority of a quorum.
Correct.
Okay.
Which is far more palatable, but still is a job to get.
Mm-hmm. Here's a very specific question. I don't know if any of us have a word of wisdom on this, but the insurance premium dropped $71,000 over last year, which is not a bad thing. And it was $100,000 less than the estimated premium. Our owners have a special one-time insurance HOA payment assessment. I assume choices are refunding it, waiting until October, moving it to reserves. Anybody have any thoughts on that?
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
Very seldom do you ever see money returned.
Yep. What owner personal information do all owners legally have access to? There are
Name,
certain,
address.
Yeah.
Name, address, name, address, and unit number.
Yeah.
there are certain specific things that are mentioned in the statute that are not accessible.
There's a whole laundry list of things that are not accessible. Emails, phone numbers, right? Social Security, emergency.
Financial, medical, yeah.
Financial.
I think we answered, okay, that one. We answered previously
Yeah, we answered this, the 1 year.
statutory reference on video. Okay. Oh, I'm not sure. This is question whether or not HOAs have to send proposals and documents for review and vote by board members along with the meeting agenda to all owners, or is that just for comment?
Well, last year, as part of the HOA reforms last year, they do have to include an agenda. You know, before an HOA could just post the old sign, you know, meeting on Tuesday night. And so last year they did have to, nothing changed from what happened last year, and that is that they have to at least post an agenda.
Okay. Here's a question on SERS and whether estimated replacement costs have to be adjusted for estimated future inflation.
Well, they can be. That was a change that was made last year where in the bill last year where it was not, inflation wasn't included, and so now it can be included. There was actually a prohibition against, it was kind of a weird, quirky thing, but now it can be adjusted, and most of the ones, certainly the reputable folks that are doing these now are obviously including, I think I don't tie me to the number, but I want to say it's like at 3% or something, where they say, because the roof that you're going to pay for in 10 years is going to be different than if you were to run out and pay for a roof today. So they're including an inflation factor in it.
Okay, a question on SERS and general reserve funds being commingled, or must they be held separately?
I think hasn't the recommendation has been that they are separate. I don't know that there is there specific language in the statute?
No.
It's not in this bill.
Yeah, I mean, the accounting for them, if you're holding them in certain, different pools, like your non-SERS pool and your SERS pool, which you should, because it allows for greater flexibility. Plus, you can only move non-SERS items to SERS items. You cannot move SERS items to non-reserve SERS items.
Okay.
But the account that they're held in, there's no requirement. I mean, I probably would keep them separate, but I mean, there's no requirement to. But
Okay. Any limits on developer budget percentage changes?
I'll see any.
not in this bill.
Okay.
That video conference one question there, goes right to what Travis was saying about AI picking up just the first version of a bill.
Right.
Okay, so those, restraints and board member prohibition from attending, that did not go into this 913 bill.
Right. Okay.
No, right.
Do condo bank statements have to be posted on the condo's website?
That's kind of a dicey one because what it accounted for, it didn't say bank statements per se. I know that a lot of the management companies have kind of a short form because the statements are official records, but they have a short form typically that they will post. And it says bank statements in the new law, and I would assume that a lot of the management companies are going to continue to maybe post that shorter form just as an initial protection of information. I certainly don't want to speak for FSR, but I guess that's probably what's going to happen.
Something we didn't discuss that's not on the state level, but the Corporate Transparency Act, is that still alive?
It's been a roller coaster this year. I think the final word right now is it's no, correct?
Well, it's alive, but I don't think
Not for us.
Not for us.
Not for us.
All right. I think Travis, there's a question directed at you about shared facilities owned by hotels. I think we discussed that.
Yeah, I think, I don't know when that question came in, but yeah, I discussed that.
Yep.
They repealed that retroactivity language from last year.
Question about social committee meetings, whether they need to be recorded and archived.
It's all in how you notice it. If it's noticed as a Zoom meeting, it's going to have to be retained. The only difference on that is sometimes committee meetings would not need to be if they're not making that final recommendation, but you have got to go back and defer to your documents because some governing documents require that all committee meetings be noticed. So then if you notice it as a Zoom, you're going to have to keep it.
Okay, and then the question about official records, when does the law regarding official records retention come into effect? I think we've mentioned that.
Yeah.
These are all July 1st, assuming the governor doesn't veto it. When preparing annual budget, is it mandatory to put to the penny the amount of money requested by the SEERS study? We talk about pause in funding. Can we downsize the SEERS funding if the reserve is already significant?
So the SERS funding, so what you put in the reserve has to be based on what is in that reserve study, not the other way around. So the STRS funding requirements, you know, when your analyst creates the STRS, the actual report, they are going to take into account what you've got already in your reserves. So, you know, and when they're coming up with whatever the calculation is to determine how much, you know, you need to put in for this year or what needs to go into the study.
Okay, we'll take a few more. We've got 48 left. I don't know if we can enter a speed round here to try to knock them all out, but let's see how we can do here. My association uses Building Link, which has a section where you can download association documents. Owners have access to this feature. Does that count as a website?
It may, it's going to depend on if Building Link, that portion has everything that is statutorily required to
Right.
be there, as well as that is password protected.
Yeah, the portal. There's a requirement for certain things to be behind an access portal. So I'm not familiar with that program. I don't know whether it satisfies that requirement.
Okay. Both video and minutes are kept for 12 months. Didn't the minutes change to indefinitely last session?
The minutes stay forever.
Yeah, the minutes are going to stay forever. The recording has to stay for 12 months, and then the minutes can replace just the event.
Okay, here's a community with only 23 units, so we don't have to have a website. Who is responsible to hold on to the recording of Zoom meetings?
Yeah, whoever's holding on to your official records.
Yeah. Yep.
Likely the manager.
Yeah.
Okay. As a non-resident board member, I typically join meetings by Zoom. Does the Zoom link need to be made available to all owners?
If you're going to count towards quorum by attending by Zoom, I think that that's going to have to be then provided to everyone and then kept and recorded. If you want to just call in, that would be a difference.
Right, right.
Okay, here's a question about a community going through extensive renovations assessed at 7 million. Can we postpone?
Yeah, that's, I mean, first of all, it would be after July 1 is the only time this pause thing, because that's when this new law would take effect. And then it depends, and I think it was Marnie that walked us through this during the presentation. It depends on if you're doing that because of your milestone inspection, or if you've got to get a majority vote of the unit owners. But yes, you could, based on just that, what I'm looking at there, you know, without knowing all the other facts, but you could be part of that group that, because you're doing repairs now due to a milestone inspection and you've gotten your your unit owner vote, you could then be eligible to pause those reserves, then after you get your repairs done, do a new SIRS, an updated SIRS, and then fund off of that going forward.
Okay, we got time for maybe a couple more. What are the rules for condos less than 3 habitable levels in terms of reserves?
You have to do the reserves that you've always had to do in the past, which would be roof, paving, painting, and anything that now would be over $25,000. Because it only applies to 3 habitable stories and above. So if you're 1-story, 2-story, two-story over parking, it does not apply. You just are dealing with your reserves as before, and you can still waive and reduce them with a majority of the unit owner vote.
The next question is a very specific one, but I think maybe if we can answer the general one in terms of the ability to pool SERS reserves.
I'm sorry, I was answering a question. Now they're getting to me on my phone. Good Lord. I'm sorry, what?
Just in terms of whether you can set up pooling for SERS reserves.
I think if you have a special assessment for a particular project, it has to have the notice and the purpose. The money can only be used for that. If you had excess funds, maybe it could go into a reserve account for those items going forward.
I mean, if you identify when you're adopting the special assessment that it's for windows and doors and for emergency projects, I mean, I think there's a way to do it, but like,
yeah, then you can spend it, whatever is in that pool. That's what the pool's for. You can move it around.
Right.
That's what gives you the flexibility.
Right, but you're talking about 2 different things. Like
Yeah,
you're talking about pooled reserves, and he's talking about money to be used
right.
from a special
Special assessment, yeah.
So
Oh, right, I see. Yeah.
Mixing statutory limitations.
Mhm. Okay, well, I need to be sensitive to everyone's time. So I think that's about it in terms of the questions we can handle. We'll try to get some responses out to the remaining questions that were submitted. As part of our promise, FirstService's promise to deliver exceptional service, we're going to continue to advocate on behalf of associations. It's become, unfortunately, a situation, we don't have off years when the legislature's in session. Every year they're trying to do something and tweak the legislation, and we need to be vigilant, and we will call upon our communities from time to time when we need your involvement to let your legislators hear from you. Unfortunately, the people that are happy with the way things work are not the ones that are contacting their legislators to let them know they're happy. It's the people that have the grievances, and the squeaky wheel kind of gets the grease, and that's the way the legislative process works. So we're going to continue to be active, and we thank Travis, for his involvement on our behalf and on behalf of our community associations. Again, I want to thank the panelists for their participation this morning. You guys are great, and we really appreciate the input. For more educational materials, you can go to the FirstService website, www.fsresidential.com. We'll post various educational materials designed for condominium and community association board members. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today, and wish everybody a great day. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
thank you guys. Have a good day.